Okay. Hello, everybody. My name is Anton Strickland, but you probably know me best as Kinjo Goldbar. And today I'm here to tell you about mystery visual novels and how you can go from clueless to creator. I made my first video game in 2006 when I was 12 years old, self-taught in GameMaker, but I didn't start making mystery games until 2010 in high school. That's when I made When the Sea Cats Cry, an Umineko fan game series currently rated 7 out of 10 on VNDB. I made some online friends thanks to those games, and they worked with me to create Detective Butler, Maiden Voyage Murder, under my company Goldbar Games. Currently, it's at 82% positive reviews, and right now I'm working on a sequel. Most recently, in 2023, I started up a new company called Mystery Gamedev, which I'll talk about more later, but I teamed up with a number of other well-known mystery game devs to create Replaced for the Spooktober Game Jam. Replaced has 90% positive reviews, and our team won third place as well as Best Original Soundtrack, and you can read the entire process of how we made the game in our development book DLC. I've worked on many more projects than just the ones here, but in the interest of time, those are my most relevant ones for this talk. Also on my list of accomplishments is having met Ryuki Shio7, the creator of Umineko, and he even signed my Kinjo portrait. He was very friendly and kind to me, and I'll never forget that adventure, but that's a story for another day. So here's the agenda for today. I'll take you from being totally clueless about mystery visual novels to being fully prepared to start making your own. I will show you concrete examples of how the best mystery visual novels use their gameplay mechanics to enhance their mystery stories, and I'll explain the rules for making mysteries, what to do, what not to do. And since I only have 20 minutes, I'll tell you where you can go from here if you're ready to begin your mystery game dev journey. So why do mystery visual novels matter? Mysteries are more popular than ever. Whether it's true crime videos getting millions of views on YouTube, mystery shows getting hundreds of millions of views on Netflix, prominent courtroom trials being live streamed and talked about all over the internet, and real life escape rooms literally booming in popularity, it's abundantly clear that mysteries are in high demand. But mystery games and visual novels are in incredibly short supply. Only 7% of all visual novels on itch.io are tagged mystery. Only 3% of all visual novels are tagged detective, crime, or escape game. And those numbers are including works in progress or games that have been completely abandoned. Of those finished games, only a small fraction of those will be any good, so you're going to have an extremely hard time finding something that is even worth playing. The truth is, we can do so much better, and there's no reason any mystery visual novel developer should be struggling when mysteries are so popular everywhere else. What is a mystery visual novel? A mystery is a story whose plot involves a crime or other event that remains puzzlingly unsettled until the very end. So, a mystery visual novel is just a cross between a story game and a puzzle game. In 1983, the Portopia serial murder case was released, and it widely defined the visual novel genre, not just for mystery visual novels, but for visual novels, period. It has the text on the bottom, the images at the top, dialogue choices, and point and click elements. The story also features a locked room murder mystery with a shocking twist solution, a callback to Western Golden Age mystery novels. The story design from these Golden Age mysteries and gameplay design from Portopia were highly influential in the creation of what I call the Big Four mystery visual novels. From 2001 to 2010, Ace Attorney, When They Cry, Zero Escape, and Danganronpa all became massively successful franchises, creating their own niches and inspiring countless indie developers. There are three key differences between mystery visual novels and other genres. One, they are not just a story. Puzzle design makes or breaks the game. A satisfying mystery is the difference between a positive or a negative review. Two, they include gameplay systems to facilitate solving of the puzzles, not just choices, but actual gameplay. Three, they prioritize the pursuit of truth over the pursuit of love. Most people probably associate visual novels with dating sims where you pursue different love interests. But the unique aspect of a mystery visual novel is that any amount of romance will take a backseat to the solving of the puzzle. If you enjoyed playing one of the big four, it's very common that you will also enjoy the other three. Here you can see a map of the most popular visual novels on VNDB, courtesy of Bunny Advocate from a previous VNConf talk a few years ago. Each node on the map is a visual novel, and the proximity of each node indicates the ratio of people who play the one game that go on to play the one next to it. I overlaid the logos of each mystery visual novel so you can see more easily where they cluster. You'll notice that the romance games are on the bottom, the porn games are on the top, and the mystery games are right in the middle. They are completely different audiences, they don't overlap. This is why I believe, in my experience, that advertising to general purpose visual novel communities just doesn't work, because they are either looking for romance or porn, and there's nothing wrong with that, but those just aren't the kind of games I'm making. And here you can see just how close they cluster together. They're right next to each other, except for Umineko, and I suspect that's because it's the one with the least amount of gameplay. The other three were initially released on major consoles and designed primarily for a more mainstream gaming audience. Now, let's take a look at how the Big Four do things right. Spoiler alert, from here on out, this is a spoiler warning for all of the Big Four visual novels, and it will remain in effect for the rest of this talk. In order to actually go over these examples so that you get something meaningful out of this talk, I will need to reveal a few spoilers. These include the explanations of a few puzzles and the revealing of a few victims and culprits. That said, I've tried to reduce the amount of spoilers to the bare minimum, and I believe you can still thoroughly enjoy each game even if you hear the spoilers I'm about to tell you. They're about 10 years old after all, these games, so... The detective subgenre is one where a detective, either professional or amateur, investigates and solves a crime. Umineko Nanaku Koroni, or in English, When the Seagulls Cry, is an excellent example. The game is formatted exactly like a Golden Age detective story, constantly referencing Golden Age mystery authors like Agatha Christie, Ronald Knox, and S.S. Van Dyne. Umineko is set up like a game between author and reader. The gameplay is simply reading the story from start to finish, not even any choices, but with the task of using your own brain to make sense of what's happening in the story. Umineko includes a convenient tip screen to keep track of relevant information. Character profiles will update when you meet someone new, when they go missing, or when they get killed off. There are also notes on certain things, like the riddle of Beatrice's epitaph, which is the central puzzle of the entire story. It's good to have these tips as reference points, because especially for a long game like Umineko, the player may take a break from reading and will need to quickly refresh their memory on what's happening without spending too much time catching up. The only way these tips screens could have been improved was if they also included the red text. Umineko uses red text to highlight the absolute truth. Players can analyze these red statements in conjunction with everything else to make theories about what really happened. Red text is mostly useful for situations that cannot be proven or disproven except through word of God. And actually, this was used a lot in detective fiction from the Golden Age. They would just write in the footer of the page, yes, you can trust everything this person is saying about the situation to give the player a fair chance at solving it. The puzzle here is that 6 dead bodies were found in a locked room, the chapel. The only key to the chapel was sealed inside an envelope that had been in the possession of a certain character ever since the night before, when everyone was still alive. The next morning, this character then opens the envelope to find the key, which she uses to discover the dead bodies. So the question is, how did the victims get inside the chapel if the door was locked and there was no way for the culprit to use the key? On top of this, Beatrice also says in red that all of the victims definitely went through the door, so this is only possible using magic, right? The answer is actually really simple. Out of all the red text presented, not one of them states the door was ever actually locked in the first place, meaning that the person who discovered the crime scene simply lied about unlocking the door. It was a false premise. This solution is never actually proven the way a detective story would normally prove a theory, but that's only because Umineko is a different type of detective story, but it is still very much one worth reading. Next is the courtroom subgenre, where the story involves conflicts in court between characters in the legal profession. In Phoenix Wright, you play the role of a defense attorney, so your goal is to prove your client innocent. The interesting catch is that in most cases, you prove your client innocent by proving someone else guilty. So it's incredibly satisfying to be backed into a corner and then completely turn the tables and end up getting the prosecution's witness cornered instead. Gameplay is split into 2 sections, an investigation part where you gather evidence, followed by a courtroom part where you use that evidence to point out contradictions. During your investigation, you have the options to examine, move, talk, and present evidence, all options that were also in the Portopia serial murder case. During court, you must listen to witness testimony and raise an objection if something seems wrong. In this courtroom scene, Mr. White is talking about what he saw through the window into the room where the murder took place. He says the victim ran left, but April May's testimony, who you cross-examined earlier, said the victim ran right. It makes more sense to believe she went right, toward the door, trying to escape from her attacker. If she had gone left, she would have ran opposite the door into a dead end. The only way Mr. White could have seen the victim going left is if he was standing in the room with her exactly where the killer is supposed to be standing. The player is even prompted to point out the exact spot. These game mechanics lend themselves really well to a repeatable game loop that can be used in an endless number of cases. Next is the death game subgenre, where characters are forced to participate in a survival game where elimination means death. In Danganronpa, the gameplay is similar to Ace Attorney, with an investigation followed by a battle royale debate between every survivor. They must cast votes to determine who committed the crime, and if they get it right, the culprit gets executed and they live to the next round. If they fail, then the culprit escapes while the rest of them get killed instead. All characters are arranged in a circle in a 3D courtroom. The camera pans around as each character speaks. When you spot a contradiction, you must aim your cursor and fire the corresponding truth bullet, the piece of evidence that proves the contradiction, at the statement before it disappears. Other minigames involve timing and reflexes also come up during the debate, but most of these have nothing to do with the logical deduction necessary to solve the crime. Danganronpa effectively uses the chaos of many people arguing over each other to create a confusing narrative that ultimately has many shocking twists and turns. During the first debate, the characters figure out that the gold coloring on the victim's wrist meant that her attacker used a golden sword to hit her there. However, the sword's sheath was damaged. They reason that the nearby kitchen knife was used to scratch it, meaning that the person who started the fight was using the knife and the victim grabbed the sword to defend herself. That is, until they realized that the victim's palms were not covered in gold and the faucet in the bathroom was turned off that night, meaning that it was the victim who used the knife and the attacker who used the sword. Basically, it's a complete role reversal. The person who ultimately lost her life was actually the one who attempted the murder, and she ended up getting killed in self-defense. This twist fills you with despair because she seemed like such a trustworthy and innocent friend. Finally, we have the escape room subgenre, where characters are trapped in a confined space and must solve puzzles to get out. In Zero Escape, the tutorial does an excellent job of using a variety of game mechanics. First, you wake up in a room that is constantly being filled with water, and you need to get out of there to survive. You start by searching around the room for items, clicking to add them to your inventory. You find a locked blue box, a locked red box, a blue key, a red key, and 2 pieces of paper with blue and red triangles on them. You can also combine items together, in this case a picture frame with a screwdriver, to create new items. So you unscrew the picture frame to take out the picture. You must then rotate the picture, and on the back, you find a legend for deciphering the triangles. You then use that legend in combination with the papers to determine what numbers you need to enter on each combination lock in order to open each box. Finding what is inside both boxes is required to open the door and escape the room. Good puzzle design is also good mystery design. All clues needed to solve all the puzzles were placed inside the game area, and there was no excess clues. This was also true for the puzzle design of the other games we talked about earlier. All clues matter. They all have a purpose in the story and a use for the player. My advice for beginners is to do exactly what I did starting out. I kept everything simple and small for my first Detective Butler game. I knew that writing a mystery story was hard enough on its own, so instead of adding anything like branching choices or complex gameplay, I just wanted to start out by making a small but good mystery story, and many people would say I succeeded. The sequel was where I messed up. I got excited and tried to add 3D scenes. Full movement where you go around collecting evidence, and then you use that evidence in a Danganronpa-style debate. The problem was that the sequel was more ambitious than I could realistically handle, and the project collapsed under its own weight. I had to take a break from it for several years, but now I've scoped it down to something more manageable. And making your game episodic is practically a death sentence. It's very tempting to do since all of the big four are episodic games, and we were all inspired by those. But I cannot tell you how many mystery games, including my own, set out to do an episodic series and have been stuck in development hell ever since, even just for episode 2. Do not send yourself down this path. It is not worth it. Remember, a small but good mystery is always better than a long but bad one. This is exactly how we finished Replaced in just 30 days. I remembered what worked for Detective Butler and applied it to that project, and even though the majority of people on that team never worked with each other before, we ended up making a winning mystery game. Now, let's talk about the rules of fair play. It was not always the case that mysteries were solvable. They were more about watching the genius detective figure it out while you enjoyed the show. But some people wanted to play along and solve it before the detective did, like playing a game. So during the 1910s and 20s, there were a lot of mystery authors trying to figure out a set of fair play rules. By 1930, these rules were well established, and an official detection club was formed, made up of the best authors of the time. They held regular meetings, helped each other out with their individual projects, and even collaborated together on group projects. Remember when we talked about puzzles being more important than romance earlier? That was actually a fair play rule this whole time. Here are some more examples of rules, very paraphrased and condensed here for the sake of time. Any mystery less than a murder is not worth the trouble. The detective or servant being the killer is too cheap. Hidden passages and unknown science is not playing fair. You get the point. There are way too many rules to deeply discuss or even list out and read to you than we have time for right now, so I hope these paint a general picture. That said, I did want to go a little bit deeper into just 4 rules that I think are really important. First, make the mystery worth solving. Mysteries are not about keeping the player in the dark. It's not about coming up with the most difficult or most unsolvable puzzle. That's where a lot of people go wrong. It's about coming up with a puzzle that is satisfying to solve. In other words, if the solution is too confusing or doesn't make sense or feels unfair, then the whole thing was a waste of time. Don't waste the player's time. Umineko is exceptionally good at hiding secrets and completely subverting your expectations about what's true and what's not true. And when you really get to the heart of the story, it has a really deep philosophical message that resonates with nearly everyone who plays it. Second, make the answer obvious in hindsight. Again, rather than trying to make the most unsolvable mystery, you actually want to rub all the clues in the player's face, dangle it right in front of them, and watch as they struggle to figure it out. Those are always the best mysteries. Some would argue that the dying message in Danganronpa gave away the killer's identity too easily, just as they might argue that the dying message in my game, Detective Butler, did the same. But there are going to be people who don't figure it out so quickly, and even if they do, there are still other aspects of the story to solve. Better that a mystery is too obvious that some people figure it out early than so impossible nobody thinks they had a fair chance at solving it. Third, even if the player fails to solve the mystery, you have to make them feel smart. Give them chances to show they solved at least part of it, even the most simple thing. A text prompt asking them the most basic questions to gauge their understanding. That's a strong benefit of video games over books. You can actually interact with the player to see how they're doing, and your game can dynamically respond to them. If they're doing well, reward them. If they're starting to show signs of failure, nudge them in the right direction with a subtle hint. And always include at least one character who is so stupid that the player will walk away feeling like a genius. There may be a lot of prompts in Ace Attorney and Danganronpa that seem too easy, and a lot of the characters in the debates might seem like complete idiots, but that's by design. It made everyone who played those games feel smart, even if they're completely new to the mystery genre, and they had such a fun time, they'll want to come back and play more. Rule number 4, my favorite and probably the most important, there are no rules. Umineko proves this point very easily by intentionally breaking many of the Van Dyne rules. Love is a strong theme of the story, and there are many long and descriptive passages unrelated to the mystery. At one point, they parody a Van Dyne rule by comparing the butt of a cigarette to the brand smoked by a suspect, which is such a cliche, you're just never supposed to do that. Danganronpa breaks the no suicides and there must be only one detective rules. Ace Attorney breaks the don't use supernatural means to uncover the truth rule quite a lot, and the guilty party will often show up well after the early part of the story. But generally, when you're just starting out, following the rules is a good thing. It teaches you how to write a mystery. When you want to do something more creative and innovative in the genre, you can bend the rules as much as you want. Remember, there's a reason why these guys wrote the rules. They saw lots and lots of bad mysteries being made, and it took years of experience to write a list of things you should do and not do in order to make a mystery that people will actually enjoy. Don't take it for granted, but don't let it stop you either. And for your convenience, I have all these rules posted on my website at mysterygamedev.com/rules, which you can check out once the talk is over. So, how do you get started making your own? Start by picking a subgenre from the ones we talked about. Then pick what kinds of gameplay you want to add. Like I said earlier, I recommend starting small. Then I highly suggest you use an outline. For Detective Butler, I rewrote my story so many times I lost track of what the answer actually was. For Replaced, we only rewrote parts of the outline, not the actual story, and that saved us tremendous amounts of time. A logic error is what happens when your own solution to the mystery doesn't actually work because you've contradicted yourself. It's even worse than a plot hole, and it can become a living nightmare. It is always better to catch these in the outline stage, looking at the big picture, instead of being knee-deep in the story and realizing your mystery is literally impossible to solve. That's why getting feedback from someone else is so important. You need a fresh set of eyes or a fresh brain thinking about your mystery and trying to solve it. You'd be surprised, just like with other kinds of game testing, what the player will end up trying to do in order to break your game. And try to resist the urge to modify the outline. It's not even about scope creep, although that's also true. Just it's how these logic errors tend to happen. You make one small change, not thinking about how it affects the rest of the story, but then it all comes crashing down. Make a plan, stick to the plan, and make it happen. Here is a really basic outline to get you started. Most mysteries use this format to some degree, and I use it for Detective Butler and Replaced. The first part introduces all the necessary information to the reader, setting things up for later parts, and ending with the discovery of the crime. The second part goes deep into the mystery through a cycle of investigation and deduction until eventually the detective explicitly tells the reader that the mystery is not possible to solve. The final part is where the detective explains who committed the crime, how, and why, and the story comes to a conclusion. At this point, the best thing you can do is just gain experience by writing some mysteries and seeing how they go. There are many more elements you need to know, but we just don't have enough time for those today. And I know what you're thinking. Okay, but it sounds like mystery games are really, really hard to make. Yes, they are. You might be thinking it's too confusing and too much work. You're not smart or logical enough. You might be thinking you don't know any clever tricks, you don't have any skills or the money or the time or anyone to help you. That's okay, because we are here to help. Mystery Game Dev is a community for anyone interested in mystery games, whether they are fans or developers. There are many general-purpose visual novel communities, but none are specifically dedicated to mysteries. Out of all this time, I've never found one until I had to make one. I started this one to help bring together these two groups of people who seem to have trouble finding each other. Mystery fans always want to find more mystery games, and developers are struggling to connect with their audience. Mystery Game Dev solves both problems. If you're brand new to mystery game development, that's totally fine. We have a place for beginner questions, and then as you create a project and level yourself up, you gain access to more channels that go into deeper topics. Just like the Golden Age Detection Club, we hold monthly voice calls and build community projects together. We have experts who are more than happy to answer questions and provide you with the tools and resources you need to go all the way from clueless to creator, and then you will be the mystery expert. So, in conclusion, if you want to learn about mystery games, join Mystery Game Dev. If you want to play them, join Mystery Game Dev. If you want to make your own, join Mystery Game Dev. Please go to mysterygamedev.com where you'll find links to our Discord, Substack, YouTube, and X. Thank you for listening, and I will answer any questions if we have time. And I think we do, because that was the fastest I've ever done that. But
you nailed it. It's to the minute on time for it. You were perfect.
Excellent.
All right. Okay, questions. I know there are a few. Let me go into the thing. Okay, so someone asked, how much weight do you give to mini games as part of puzzle development in solving crimes?
I mean, that's totally up to you. Personally, I haven't really done too many mini games. I think as long as it helps, like you saw the examples with Zero Escape, those are highly interactive segments. Now, Danganronpa had some mini games that are not really strictly necessary for solving anything. So, like, if I had to put a mini game in my own game, I would probably do more along the lines of Zero Escape, where you're actually interacting with the environment in order to like find clues and discover evidence, as opposed to some of Danganronpa's mini games that are just like, you know, they had one that was like more of a rhythm game where it was like mash the buttons at the right times, and it didn't really seem to matter. So like, if you're going to add a mini game, it's going to be the most interesting if you can find a way to interact with the mystery that way, and discover the clues or use the clues in some way.
Okay. How do you choose a satisfying culprit if twists like it was the protagonist, blah, 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 are also becoming more and more common and predictable?
Yeah, so that's a good question, because obviously one of the rules is don't choose the detective, although that's also been shattered many times. There's also the old classic trick of, the least likely suspect is the one that did it. In my opinion, a satisfying culprit just boils down to, and this is one of the rules as well, if you read more into it, but a satisfying culprit just has to be someone who you spend a lot of time with in the story, and the story sort of emphasizes the role of that character a lot, because it really doesn't matter who you pick. What matters is, how does the story foreshadow that character being the culprit, and how do the themes of that story make it matter? How is it impactful? Umineko is probably the best example of that, because there's a lot of themes in that story that, even though certain parts of Umineko may be considered cliche or rule breaking, it really does a good job of like really making it work. If that makes sense.
Cool.
One more thing to add on to that, I would say that there's also a good quote about this from one of the other Golden Age authors, that basically if you're following like a trend, like a mystery trend, if you're talking about like things getting predictable, then something that used to be very predictable before, you can sort of reinvent and make it new later on. So like, take things that used to be predictable and reinvent them now. That's another way to do it.
Cool. And then someone's asking, would an escape room still count as a mystery game, even if it's more about getting out and why you are there?
So good question. I mean, I count it as a mystery because you're trying to solve something. You're trying to solve puzzles. And again, this is sort of where the distinction sort of blurs together. Some people make a big deal about whether or not a game is a visual novel or a game. How much gameplay does it turn? How much gameplay can you add to a visual novel before it becomes a game, or how much narrative can you take out of a visual novel before it becomes a game? I don't really make that distinction. I just ask myself, is there a puzzle that needs to be solving, and is there some sort of narrative element? So the definition of mystery game is a valid one, and we talk about that a lot on our server, Mystery Game Dev. So yeah, very good question.
Well, any last question, guys?
Oh, and I'll put a bunch of links I have also in the chat, so people can look at my resources.
Awesome. Oh wow, that is lots of links. All right. Remember to I'll get a copy of these so that when I put it on the recording. Someone asked, what is your favorite Danganronpa trial case?
Ooh, so in all fairness, I've really only played the first Danganronpa. My favorite one out of those, probably the second one, just because. I don't really like. I liked my favorites probably are like Umineko and Phoenix Wright more than Danganronpa. But if I had to pick favorite cases for those, I would definitely say episode 2 of Umineko was like really, really good for me. I really love that one. And for Phoenix Wright, I really liked the third case, or the third not the third case, the third game. And the final case of that game was really good. So
Okay, I know there are a couple more questions you can catch
yeah,
in the chat because I
yeah.
think Alaric's up.
Okay.
All
Yeah.
right.
Thank you for hosting.
All right, Alaric. You're here somewhere.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Yep, I can hear you.
Fantastic.
And
Hopefully we have visual.
Yep, it's all yours.